Keisha Williams stood behind the counter at Liberty Diner, staring at the crumpled bills in her calloused hands. $47. That was all that stood between her and the foreclosure notice tucked under the cash register, the one that gave her exactly 6 days before the bank took everything. Snow fell in thick, furious layers outside, turning the world beyond the glass into a white void. The small restaurant was on Highway 20 in the Colorado mountains, and this storm was being called the storm of the century by meteorologists. At 50, Keisha had seen many storms, but this one felt different. This one felt like the end. She moved slowly through the empty restaurant, her footsteps echoing on the worn linoleum floor. The red vinyl booths remained empty, their surfaces cracked from decades of use. The coffee pot gurgled weakly, half full of the bitter coffee that had been there since noon. It was past 8 p.m., and she hadn't seen a customer in over 3 hours. Keisha stopped at booth number 4, Robert's favorite spot. Even 4 years after cancer took him, she could still see him sitting there, his gentle smile warming the room more than any heater ever could. They had bought this place together 20 years ago with nothing but dreams and a small inheritance from her grandmother. "We'll make it work, love," Robert used to say, his dark eyes shining with optimism. "This place will be a beacon for travelers, a home away from home." Now the lights flickered on the ceiling, threatening to go out like everything else. The heating system groaned and hissed, fighting a losing battle against the mountain cold. Keisha pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders and returned to the counter, where the foreclosure notice seemed to mock her with its official letterhead and cold bureaucratic language. The restaurant's CB radio crackled faintly in the corner, its antenna bent from years of neglect. Once that radio had been her lifeline to the trucking community, a constant stream of voices sharing road conditions, warnings, and the occasional joke. Now it was mostly silent, just another relic of better times. Keisha opened the cash register again, counting the money once more, as if the numbers might magically change. They hadn't. $47 wouldn't even cover the electric bill, let alone the 3 months of back payments the bank was demanding. She had already sold her wedding ring, Robert's tools, everything of value they had accumulated during their 27 years of marriage. This restaurant was all she had left. The wind picked up outside, shaking the building so hard that the old neon sign buzzed and flickered. Through the window, she could see the snow piling up against the gas pumps, burying them under white mounds that looked like tombstones in a cemetery. Highway 20 was completely invisible now, lost under the storm. Keisha glanced at the clock above the coffee machine. 8:15. Time to close up, turn the sign around, and admit defeat. Tomorrow she would call her lawyer, maybe see if she could negotiate some kind of payment plan, even though she knew it was pointless. The bank had been patient enough. She was reaching for the light switch when she heard it. A low growl that cut through the howling wind like thunder. At first, she thought it might be a snowplow, but the sound was different, deeper, more rhythmic, like a heartbeat made of steel and chrome. Keisha pressed her face against the window, peering through the snow. At first, she saw nothing but white. Then, slowly, shapes began to emerge from the storm. Headlights, lots of them, and beneath the lights, the distinctive silhouettes of military vehicles, Humvees and transport trucks, from the looks of them. The roar grew louder as the vehicles approached, their engines revving against the wind. Keisha counted 10 machines in total, all driving in tight formation despite the treacherous conditions. As they pulled into the restaurant parking lot, their headlights swept across the windows like spotlights, filling the empty dining room with intense white light. Keisha backed away from the window, her heart pounding. She had heard stories about military units, seen them in movies, but never actually encountered one. These men, and she could tell even through their heavy winter gear that they were all men, looked like something out of a nightmare. Camouflaged uniforms, boots, helmets that hid their faces. They moved with the confidence of people who weren't used to hearing no. The first soldier dismounted, a tall man with broad shoulders who seemed to command the others without saying a word. He looked toward the restaurant, and Keisha could feel his gaze even through the window. Slowly, deliberately, he began to walk toward the front door. Keisha's hand hovered over the light switch. She could turn off the lights, lock the door, pretend the restaurant was closed. These men wouldn't know the difference. They would probably just move on, find another place to wait out the storm. Somewhere that wasn't her problem. But as the man approached the door, she saw something that made her pause. He was limping. Not badly, but enough to notice. Behind him, the other soldiers were dismounting, and she could see that several of them were suffering. They had been driving in this storm for hours, maybe more. They were cold, exhausted, and probably desperate for shelter. The man reached the door and stopped, his gloved hand hovering over the doorknob. Through the glass, Keisha could see his face clearly now. He was older than she had expected, perhaps 40, with gray hair cut in a military style and eyes that looked like they had seen a lot. They were the eyes of someone who had seen enough hardship to recognize it in others. He knocked, 3 gentle knocks that somehow managed to be both respectful and urgent. Keisha looked back at the $47 on the counter, then at the eviction notice, then at the man waiting in the storm. Robert's voice echoed in her memory, "A light for travelers, love, a home away from home." She walked to the door and turned the lock. The moment Keisha opened the door, the full force of the storm hit her like a physical blow. Snow swirled into the restaurant and the temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. The man standing on her doorstep was covered from head to toe in ice and snow. His military jacket was frozen stiff, his beard white with frost. But it wasn't just one man. Behind him, Keisha could see the others dismounting from their vehicles, and her breath caught in her throat. These were no ordinary soldiers. Their camouflaged uniforms bore the unmistakable insignia she had seen in news reports, the emblem of the United States Marine Corps. 10 of them, all large men with arms as thick as tree trunks, faces marked by years of hard living, and the kind of presence that made smart people cross to the other side of the street. The leader was easily 6 feet tall with salt and pepper hair slicked back and a gray beard that reached his chest. Tattoos covered every visible inch of his arms. Intricate designs that told stories Keisha didn't want to know. A jagged scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, and his eyes, pale blue and sharp as winter ice, carried the weight of someone who had seen too much and done things he couldn't take back. "Ma'am," the leader said, his voice rough from the cold and probably decades of cigarettes. "I know this is an imposition, but we've been driving for 14 hours straight. The road is completely closed about 15 kilometers back, and we won't be able to go much further in this weather." Keisha's heart pounded against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to close the door, lock it, call the police. These men looked like they could tear her restaurant apart with their bare hands, and they had probably done worse to people who had crossed them. But then she saw something that gave her pause. Despite their intimidating appearance, they stood respectfully in the snow, waiting for her response. None of them pushed forward or tried to force their way in. The leader kept his hands visible, his posture non-threatening despite his size. And there was something in their eyes, exhaustion yes, but also a kind of desperate hope that she recognized all too well. "How many of you are there?" Keisha asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it. 10, ma'am, the man replied. "I'm Sergeant Jake Morrison, 2nd Marine Battalion. We're returning from a training exercise at Fort Carson, heading back to base in Quantico. We got caught when the storm intensified faster than predicted." Keisha looked past Jake to the group of men removing their helmets. They were a terrifying sight. Beards, tattoos, scars that told stories of violence and hard living. Hands that looked like they could crush bones. Faces that had seen the wrong side of many a fight. But she also saw something else. Bone-deep exhaustion, the kind that came from battling the elements for hours on end. These men, dangerous as they might be, were at the end of their strength. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. "All of you." The relief on Jake's face was immediate and profound. "Thank you," he said simply. "You have no idea what that means." The Marines entered one by one, knocking snow from their boots and shaking ice from their jackets. They were huge men, most of them, the kind who had learned to take up space in the world through necessity and reputation. Their military jackets creaked as they moved, insignia and emblems catching the restaurant's fluorescent light, unit names, ranks, badges that marked territory and alliances in a world Keisha had never been a part of. But despite their fearsome appearance, they moved carefully in the small restaurant, conscious of their size, respectful of the space they had been given. The youngest actually held the door for the oldest member, and Keisha caught several of them wiping their boots extra well before stepping on her floor. Keisha counted them as they entered. 10, just as Jake had said. The oldest appeared to be in his 50s, gray-haired and dignified despite the emblem on his jacket. The youngest, whom she had noticed earlier, had nervous eyes and hands that trembled slightly as he removed his gloves, looking more like a frightened college student than a member of the United States Marine Corps. "Sit wherever you can," Keisha told them, moving behind the counter. "I'll make coffee." The men settled into the booths and counter stools with obvious gratitude, their frozen military leather creaking as they moved. Up close, Keisha could see the details the storm had hidden. The intricate artistry of their tattoos, the careful maintenance of their insignia, the way they instinctively arranged themselves so that the older, more veteran members took the best seats while the younger ones submitted without being asked. The young man, Keisha heard someone call him Danny, sat near the window, still shivering despite the warmth of the restaurant. An older man with intricate tattoos covering both arms sat on the bench closest to the counter, nodding respectfully when Keisha made eye contact. "Haven't seen weather like this in years," Jake said, settling into a stool near the cash register. His jacket was open now, revealing more insignia. A few service ribbons suggesting military training, and a small American flag pin that seemed oddly patriotic for someone society would label a tough soldier. Keisha served coffee in thick white mugs, the familiar ritual calming her nerves. "Sugar and cream are on the counter," she said. "Help yourselves." As the men warmed their hands on the hot mugs, Keisha took stock of her situation. 10 Marines, an almost empty freezer, and $47 to her name. These weren't the kind of men you wanted to disappoint or send away hungry. But looking at their faces, weathered, tired, grateful for the simple warmth, she realized that beneath the leather and insignia and fearsome reputation, they were just human beings caught in a storm. By 10 p.m., the storm had only worsened. The wind howled like a living thing, and the snow was falling so hard that the windows looked as if they had been painted white. Jake had predicted that the road would be closed. It could be tomorrow morning, it could be 2 days. The state patrol wasn't even trying to clear it until the wind died down. Keisha nodded, doing mental calculations that didn't add up no matter how she worked them. 10 men, 2 days, practically no food left in the kitchen. The eggs and bacon were long gone, the French fries a memory. She had managed to find a few cans of soup in the back storage room, but that wouldn't stretch far. Her $47 could buy enough groceries for 1 day if the roads were clear and the stores were open, which they weren't. The Marines had settled in for the night, some napping in the cabins, others playing cards with a worn deck Jake had produced from his jacket. They had offered to pay for the meal, but Keisha had dismissed them. How could she charge them for the scraps she had managed to scrape together? Danny had fallen asleep with his head on the table, exhaustion finally overcoming him. He looked even younger asleep, maybe 20 or 21, with a kind of face that belonged in a college classroom rather than in the back of a military vehicle. Sergeant Marcus had placed his jacket over the boy's shoulders, a gesture so kind that it made Keisha's throat tighten. "He reminds me of my son," Marcus explained quietly when he caught Keisha watching. "Same age, same stubbornness. Always trying to prove he's tougher than he really is." "Where is your son now?" Keisha asked. "Afghanistan," Marcus replied. "Third tour. Coming back next month if all goes well." His voice carried the weight of a father's concern, the kind that never really goes away no matter how old his children get. Keisha poured herself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, watching her unexpected guests. In the harsh fluorescent light, they seemed less intimidating than when they had first arrived. Their military jackets hung over the backs of chairs, revealing ordinary clothes underneath: flannel shirts, worn jeans, work boots that had seen better days. These were working men, blue-collar types who probably had more in common with her late husband than with the movie stereotype she had expected. Jake approached the counter, his expression serious. "Keisha, we need to talk about payment. You've been more than generous, but we can't just—" "Don't worry about it," Keisha interrupted. "It's just food." "No ma'am, it's not," Jake said firmly. "It's hospitality. It's kindness. And it's costing you money you probably don't have." Keisha felt her cheeks flush. Was her financial situation that obvious? She tried to keep her voice steady. "I get by just fine." Jake's eyes moved to the foreclosure notice sticking out from under the cash register, and Keisha realized her attempt at discretion had failed. His expression softened with understanding. "How long do you have?" he asked quietly. 6 days, Keisha admitted, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "But that's my problem, not yours." "How so?" Jake said. "You opened your door to us when you didn't have to. You fed us when you couldn't afford to. That makes it our problem too." Keisha shook her head. "I appreciate the sentiment, but there's nothing you can do. I'm 3 months behind on payments, and the bank isn't interested in sad stories." Jake was quiet for a moment, his weathered hands wrapped around his coffee mug. Then he looked at her with eyes that seemed to see right through her defenses. "Tell me about this place," he said. "How long have you owned it?" 15 years, Keisha replied. "My husband Robert and I bought it with my grandmother's inheritance. It was his dream, a place where travelers could find a hot meal and a friendly face no matter what time of night they arrived." "Sounds like he was a good man." "The best," Keisha said, her voice catching slightly. "Cancer took him 2 years ago. I've been trying to keep the place going, but—" She gestured hopelessly at the empty restaurant, the flickering lights, the general air of barely controlled decay. "It's hard to run a business on memories and good intentions," Jake finished. "Something like that." Jake was quiet again, and Keisha could see him thinking, weighing options she couldn't guess. Finally, he spoke. "What if I told you that you've helped more people than you know? What if I told you that this place, your kindness, has probably saved lives?" Keisha frowned. "I'm not sure what you mean." 15 years is a long time, Jake said. "Many travelers pass through this stretch of road. Many people in trouble looking for help. Do you remember them all?" Keisha shook her head. "There were thousands." "But you helped them all, didn't you? Hot coffee, a warm meal, maybe a kind word when they needed it most." "I tried," Keisha said. "Robert always said we should be a light for people. A beacon, you know, someone who would leave the porch light on for travelers." Jake smiled, and there was something almost secretive about it. "A beacon," he repeated. "Yes, that's exactly what you are." Before Keisha could ask what he meant, a commotion arose from one of the booths. Marcus was shaking Danny awake, his voice urgent but gentle. "Kid, wake up. You're having a nightmare." Danny jolted awake, his eyes wild and unfocused. For a moment, he looked around the restaurant as if he couldn't remember where he was. Then recognition dawned, and his shoulders slumped with relief. "Sorry," he mumbled. "Bad dreams. They come and go." "Want to talk about it?" Marcus asked, settling back into his seat across from the young man. Danny shook his head, but after a moment spoke anyway. "It's always the same dream. I'm lost on some dark road. My vehicle has broken down, and there's nowhere to go. No lights, no help, just endless darkness." He looked around the warm restaurant, at the faces of his fellow Marines, at Keisha behind the counter. "But then I wake up and I'm here, and everything's okay." Keisha felt something shift in her chest, a recognition she couldn't name. How many people had sat in these same booths, found comfort in this same warm light? How many travelers had been lost and cold and desperate, only to find refuge in the unlikely beacon she and Robert had built on this forgotten stretch of mountain road? She looked at Jake, who watched her with that same knowing smile. "What aren't you telling me?" she asked. "Nothing you won't find out soon enough," he replied. "But right now, we need to focus on practical matters. I told you the bank wants 3 months of back payments." Keisha nodded reluctantly. "How much?" $38,000, she admitted. "Plus late fees and legal costs. It's probably closer to 45. Jake whistled softly. "That's serious money." "More than I'll ever have," Keisha said. "Look, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but $45,000 isn't the kind of thing you find in the couch cushions. This place is done, and maybe that's okay. Maybe it's time." "No," Jake said, his voice sharp enough to cut through her resignation. "It's not time. Not for a place like this. Not for a woman like you." He stood up, taking his cell phone out of his pocket. "I'm going to make some calls." And Keisha, she looked at him, surprised by the intensity in his voice. "Don't give up yet. This story isn't over." Jake returned from making his phone calls with snow in his hair and an expression Keisha couldn't read. He had been outside for nearly an hour, pacing back and forth in the storm, his voice occasionally rising above the wind as he spoke to whoever was on the other end of the line. The other Marines had watched him through the windows, exchanging glances that suggested they knew something Keisha didn't. "So?" Marcus asked when Jake finally came back inside, knocking snow off his boots. "Tomorrow morning," Jake said simply. "Maybe earlier if the road is clear." "What's tomorrow morning?" Keisha asked. But Jake just smiled and poured himself another cup of coffee. It was Marcus who broke the tension. The older Marine had been quiet most of the evening, content to play cards and drink his coffee, but now he was studying Keisha with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "You know," he said slowly, "you look familiar." Keisha raised an eyebrow. "I doubt it. I haven't been out much lately." "No, I'm serious." Marcus put his cards aside and really looked at her, his head tilted slightly as if trying to remember something important. "How long have you said you've been running this place?" 20 years. "And before that?" "Before that, Robert and I lived in Denver. He was a truck driver, making long trips all over the western states. I worked as a dispatcher for his company." Marcus suddenly cracked his knuckles so loudly that several of the other Marines looked up. "That's it. Tommy Patterson. You saved Tommy Patterson's life." Keisha frowned. "I'm sorry, I don't." Big guy. Red beard. Drove for Western Mountain Transport. Marcus was getting excited now, his voice rising. That would have been about 17, 18 years ago. He was having chest pains, stopped right here at your restaurant. The memory hit Keisha like a physical blow. She hadn't thought about that night in years. But suddenly, it was as vivid as yesterday. A lonely, frightened truck driver clutching his chest in the parking lot. She had found him there when she went out to check the dumpster, called 911, then drove him to the hospital herself when the ambulance couldn't get through a landslide on the road. "Tommy," she said softly. "I remember Tommy." "He's my brother-in-law," Marcus said, smiling now. "He married my sister 5 years ago. He tells that story at every family gathering. How the angel of the mountains saved his life. How he stayed with him in the hospital all night, called his wife, even paid for his parking when he couldn't find his wallet." Keisha felt heat rise to her cheeks. It was nothing special. Anyone would have done the same thing. "No," Marcus said firmly. "Anyone wouldn't have. That's the point." He looked around the restaurant at his fellow Marines. "Guys, I think we're sitting on a legend." The word legend seemed to electrify the group. Suddenly, everyone was talking at once, comparing notes, sharing stories. It turned out that several of them had their own memories of the Liberty Diner, their own reasons to be grateful to the woman who ran it. Carlos remembered stopping here 5 years ago when his daughter had been in a car accident in Denver. Keisha had let him use the phone to call the hospital, given him directions for the fastest route, even packed him a sandwich for the road when he was too anxious to think about eating. Jake remembered a night when his motorcycle had broken down in a snowstorm much like this one. Keisha and Robert had not only fed him and let him stay in the warmth, but Robert had helped fix his motorcycle, refusing payment for the parts or the labor. And Danny, nervous young Danny, suddenly spoke with a story that made everyone fall silent. "You may not remember me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I was here 3 years ago. I was going through a really bad time. My parents had kicked me out of the house. I had dropped out of college, lost my job. I was riding my motorcycle west with no plan, no money, no hope. In fact, I was thinking about," he paused, swallowing hard. "Well, ending it all." Keisha felt her breath catch. "I stopped here because my motorcycle was almost out of gas, and I was almost out of everything else. I had maybe $5 in my pocket, but you served me anyway. A full meal, coffee, pie. When I tried to pay, you said I looked like I was having a hard day and the meal was on the house." Danny's eyes were shiny with unshed tears. "You asked me where I was going, and when I said I didn't know, you told me it was okay. Sometimes not knowing where you're going is the first step to finding where you belong. Then you gave me a card for a friend of yours in Salt Lake City. You said he might have work for someone willing to learn." Keisha remembered now, a skinny kid with empty eyes and a motorcycle that sounded like it was held together with prayer and duct tape. She had seen that look before, the look of someone who had given up on tomorrow. "That job changed my life," Danny continued. "And the man who hired me, he became like a father to me. He helped me get back in school, introduced me to these guys." He gestured around the table to his fellow Marines. "You saved my life that day, Keisha. Not just by feeding me, but by reminding me that there were still good people in the world. People who cared about strangers." The restaurant fell silent except for the wind outside and the soft hum of the coffee machine. Keisha stood motionless behind the counter, struck by the weight of these revelations. She had helped people over the years, of course, but she had never thought of it as anything extraordinary. She had just done what felt right, what Robert would have wanted her to do. "There are more stories," Jake said softly. "Many more. You've been a beacon on this road for 15 years, Keisha. You've touched more lives than you know." "I just served food," Keisha protested weakly. "I just tried to be decent to people." "Exactly," Marcus said. "In a world that's become very indecent. That makes you special." Keisha sank into a stool behind the counter, her legs suddenly unsteady. She thought of all the faces that had passed through this restaurant over the years. Truckers, travelers, families on vacation, people running away from something or running towards something else. She had fed them all, listened to their stories, offered what comfort she could. It had never occurred to her that she was doing anything remarkable. "The calls I made tonight," Jake said, "were to people like Tommy Patterson. People who remember this place, who remember you. People who owe you a debt they could never repay for 20 years of serving this community." "You don't owe me anything," Keisha said. "That's where you're wrong," Jake replied. "And tomorrow morning, you'll understand just how wrong you are." As if summoned by his words, new lights appeared in the windows. Not the single headlights of motorcycles this time, but the twin beams of cars and trucks cutting through the storm like stars breaking through the clouds. Jake looked out the window and smiled. Or maybe tonight. The first vehicle to enter the parking lot was a pickup truck with Wyoming license plates. Next came a sedan from Utah, followed by a semi-truck with Colorado markings. Within minutes, the small parking lot was filling up with vehicles, their occupants stepping out into the storm and hurrying toward the restaurant's front door. Keisha watched in amazement as the door opened and people began to file in. Men and women of all ages, all looking around the restaurant with expressions of recognition and gratitude. Some she remembered, others were strangers, but they all wore the same look of people returning home. The first person through the door was a large man with a red beard, his arms wide open. "Keisha Williams," he shouted. "Beautiful angel, Tommy Patterson, in case you don't remember. You saved my worthless life 13 years ago, and I've been looking for a chance to return the favor ever since." As Tommy wrapped her in a bear hug that lifted her off the ground, Keisha realized that Jake had been right. This story wasn't over. It was just beginning. By dawn, the Liberty Diner looked like the epicenter of the largest gathering of military veterans in Colorado history. What had started with 10 stranded Marines had grown into something Keisha couldn't have imagined in her wildest dreams. The parking lot was packed with vehicles, pickup trucks, sedans, SUVs, even a few chartered buses, their license plates telling the story of a mobilization that spanned 3 states. Keisha moved through the crowded restaurant in a trance, accepting hugs from men and women whose faces triggered forgotten memories. These weren't just random military personnel. They were veterans from multiple generations of service, each wearing their medals with pride, each with a story about how Keisha had touched their lives. "I still can't believe this," she murmured to Jake, who was coordinating the controlled chaos. When word spread across the network that Jake Morrison's crew was stranded at Keisha Williams' place, Marcus said, every veteran within 500 miles started moving. The Angel of Highway 20 isn't just a trucker's legend. Military personnel have known that name for almost 20 years too. Keisha looked around in amazement. She recognized insignia from different branches of service. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. Men and women who normally wouldn't be seen in the same state were sharing coffee and stories at her counter. A massive man with 82nd Airborne, tattooed on his arm, approached her. 23 years ago, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "You found me passed out in your parking lot. Hypothermia. You called the ambulance, went with me to the hospital, even called my wife to let her know I was alive." Keisha stared at him, the memory slowly coming back. A younger man, barely conscious, his motorcycle broken down in a snowstorm. "Mike Hendricks," he said, extending his hand. "First Sergeant, retired. I owe you my life." The stories kept coming. A Vietnam veteran whose car had broken down. Keisha and Robert had let him sleep in the restaurant while he waited for parts. An Iraq veteran whose daughter had been in an accident. Keisha had given him directions for the fastest route and coffee for the road. Jake approached with a thick envelope, his expression serious. $127,000, he announced to the crowd. Cash from every branch of service represented here. Keisha stared at the envelope, her hands shaking. "This is too much. I can't." You can and you will, Big Mike interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. This money comes with conditions. What conditions? You keep this place running, said a veteran from the Salt Lake City Air Force. Keep being the angel you've always been. Jake produced a rolled-up piece of paper, an architect's drawing of the expanded restaurant with a proper military lounge, secure vehicle parking, and maintenance facilities. Liberty Haven, he explained. Official rest stop for all branches of the military from Colorado to New Mexico. It will guarantee steady business, provide security, take care of maintenance. A gray-haired veteran from Arizona approached. We're also establishing a protection detail. No one messes with this place or you. Ever. You're under American military protection now. The CB radio suddenly crackled. Attention, this is Base Command calling Angel. We have 40 vehicles coming from Utah. ETA 30 minutes. Keisha took the microphone with trembling hands. Base Command, this is Liberty Haven. Angel heard over the network that you were in trouble. The Utah platoon is coming hot to help. We won't let anything happen to our guardian angel. The ovation that erupted from the crowded restaurant shook the windows. Outside, engines revved in celebration, creating a thunder that echoed from the mountains. Jake approached with a final envelope. This is from Tommy Patterson. He's a veteran now, working with our veteran support organization. He used to be a truck driver until you saved his life. Inside was his old business card and a note. I've carried this for 13 years. Time to bring it home where it belongs. Thank you for giving me a second chance at life. As the various commanders began discussing logistics for the expanded operation, Keisha found herself outside looking at the sea of vehicles that filled every available space. Uniforms and insignia gleamed in the sunlight, and the badges told stories of brotherhood, loyalty, and a code of honor that most people would never understand. Jake approached, his own truck loaded and ready. You know what the best part of all this is? Last night, you didn't see Marines or soldiers. You saw 10 men who needed help, and you opened your door. That's what started all this. Keisha, he climbed into his truck. Keep the light shining, Angel. And don't worry, you have the most powerful protection in America watching over this place now. 6 months later, Liberty Haven was featured in Military Times magazine as the most important gathering place for veterans west of the Mississippi. The parking lot was expanded to accommodate more than 200 vehicles, and security was legendary. No one caused trouble within 50 miles of Keisha's place. But Keisha didn't need magazine recognition to know what she had achieved. Every day brought veterans from all over the country, all finding exactly what they needed in her corner of Colorado. Respect, good food, and the knowledge that they were welcome. The CB radio crackled constantly with veterans calling in, "How's our angel doing tonight?" Keisha always answered the same way, "The light is on, the coffee is hot, and the roads are always open to family." Because that's what Liberty Haven had become. The unofficial headquarters of Western veterans' hospitality, proof that respect and kindness could bridge any gap, and that sometimes the most unlikely guardians were the ones who protected what mattered most. The light would always guide them home. One summer afternoon, as Keisha watched a group of young Afghanistan veterans laughing around one of the expanded tables, her phone rang. It was Jasmine, now in medical school at the University of Colorado, fully funded by the military scholarships that had been arranged. "Mom," Jasmine said, her voice full of pride, "I just got accepted into the emergency medicine residency program. I want to work with veterans, especially those with PTSD. I told them about you, about how this place saves people." Keisha felt tears well up in her eyes. "Your father would be so proud." "And you, Mom? You turned our near loss into something that touches thousands of lives. Liberty Haven isn't just a restaurant, it's hope." That night, when the last veterans had left and Keisha was closing up, she paused in front of the new sign on the wall, a simple phrase Jake had commissioned. "Here we don't ask where you came from, only if you're hungry." Below it was a photo from that first snowy night, the 10 Marines sitting around their tables, tired but grateful, surrounded by the warm light that had saved them from the storm. Keisha smiled, remembering Robert's words, "A light for travelers, love. A home away from home." She had kept her promise. And every night when she turned on the neon sign, she knew that somewhere on the dark road, someone in need of hope would see that light and know they had found a safe place. If this story of kindness rewarded and community caring for its own touched your heart, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Have you witnessed how small acts of kindness can create waves of transformative impact? Have you ever been helped by a stranger in your time of greatest need? Remember, sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one who simply cares enough to keep the light on when others need to find their way home. Comment "Light always on" if you also believe that genuine hospitality can change the world, one person at a time. See you in the next video with more stories that prove that kindness is never wasted and that sometimes miracles start with someone simply opening the door.